here's the part of being a pro runner we never talk about. 17 days before I was supposed to line up on the elite field of the Chicago Marathon, I got injured. And suddenly, overnight almost, my job felt pretty uncertain. The question no one really answers is what actually happens when a pro athlete can't do the one thing they're paid to do? Do you still get paid? Do contracts change? Is there insurance for this? Do brands just wait? And what does this do to your head when the thing you've built your entire life around suddenly disappears overnight? Today, I'm going to explain the reality, and I'm going to show you exactly what the last few months have looked like. The money impact, contract ramifications, mental health, and how an injury can cost a lot more than time. So I think there's three main categories of costs when you're dealing with an injury as an athlete. Your contract or contracts, wider finances, things you lose or things you have to pay out because of the injury. And then there's your identity, the mental health side of it, and the result of a lot of the practical changes from not being able to do your job. And to be able to talk about the first one, the impact of contracts, kind of need to explain to you how these contracts work. Contracts or sponsorships, whether we like it or not, are the main source of income for athletes like me. Track and field athletes, swimmers, even a lot of athletes on team sports where they get paid by the team, they have individual sponsorships and contracts as well. And on the face of it, it's very simple. Brand sponsors athlete, gives them contract. Here is the money that we will pay you annually, and often it includes bonuses for certain performances. You wear or endorse our products, happy days. Now, I don't know of anyone having a contract that has a clause in it that says when you get injured, we pull the rug up from underneath your feet and you don't get paid anymore. That's not the problem. The problem with some of these contracts is that timing really matters. When you have a sponsorship, the contract is there to protect both parties, and these contracts tend to be very lengthy and very heavily legally worded. So I'm not allowed to tell you what I was being paid at the time I got injured or what my contract looked like. But I can say in general that athletes have been unlucky if, let's say, they are nearing the end of a multi-year deal. Regardless of how successful that athlete has been earlier on in that contract, there's something called the recency bias, and it applies with sponsorships. So if in those last few months of their contract, when conversations start happening with the brand that they're currently with competitor brands, you're in those negotiation phases, and they pick up an injury and can't race or have some bad race results because of it, that can really impact their earning capabilities for the next contract cycle, and not in the direction we would like it to be impacted. Now, obviously, I'm speaking from the perspective of the athlete, but I know this isn't personal. Let's dumb it down to what brands actually want when they work with an athlete. From a sponsor's perspective, they want a return on their investment. They want that athlete to be showing up at training, perhaps online, showing up at races and performing, and they want to see them being an athlete in their gear. That's exposure, which is literally what they're paying for. On the one hand, you'd like to think that brands would think ahead and not just in the here and now when an athlete has an injury, but some don't. And some may look at another prospective athlete who doesn't have an injury and decide to go in that direction. This is sport, and whether we like it or not, it's business. How an injury in relation to an athlete's contract and the timing of that injury with their contract can also be affected by what their bonus structure looks like. Some athletes may take a less attractive base salary deal because the brand has offered them a very appealing bonus structure. They can be put in a really negative position if an injury crops up unexpectedly and that income massively materially changes. Anecdotally, I've heard from athletes and agents that getting really strong bonus setups in contracts is becoming more difficult because of shoe technology and the times moving forward. So brands understandably aren't wanting to give away as much cash for really fast times or high positions in races. So hopefully that's less of an issue now, but that's also only if that money is kind of put back into the base and the athletes are still receiving that investment. So that's kind of contracts in a nutshell. And whilst I can't talk about my specific circumstances, I think I was more fortunate than others. And that's because whilst I'd love to have a 2:23 or a 2:22 marathon time to my name, which would be a huge selling point to brands wanting to keep me and wanting to pay me when you're going into those sponsor talks, when you're going into those negotiations. I also don't solely rely on a kit or shoe deal to fund my life. And that means I experience a fair amount less stress compared to those athletes who perhaps their sole income is that sponsorship when an injury strikes at a more crucial time in sponsor talks. There's something about this time of year when that fresh start energy energy has kind of worn off and real life starts to kick back in. Work is busy, schedules are full, and if you're navigating something hard, like an injury, it doesn't magically feel lighter because the calendar changed, even if the days are starting to get that little bit longer. And it was a few weeks ago that I realized I didn't actually need to fix anything or massively overhaul my life. I just needed to give myself some space to take a quiet few minutes where I wasn't trying to solve my entire future. So I started using Headspace for short meditations and sleep casts, especially on the nights when my brain just wouldn't switch off. Because whether we like it or not, the sleep you get at night really shapes how you show up the next day. And when you're feeling fragile or uncertain, bad sleep just amplifies everything. Something I found really reassuring is that just 5 minutes a day of Headspace is proven to reduce stress. Just 5 minutes feels so doable, even on the days that feel extra heavy. And knowing it's actually doing something tangible for my nervous system helps me feel a little more steady. You can literally feel some of that tension just start to drain. It's so simple, and it's science. You can also see improvements in sleep quality in as little as 7 days of using Headspace, which feels huge when your nights are restless. I'll talk more about how this injury affected me mentally and how that changed over the weeks and months later on, because that part really blindsided me. But looking back, what I needed wasn't this huge reset or an effort to course correct my emotions. It was just small, consistent moments and committing to making that space for what I was actually feeling.
Tonight's wind down is a breathing exercise. So, when you're ready, let's begin.
If you want to build better sleep or strengthen your mental health as part of your routine, even in small, low-effort ways, you can try Headspace completely free for 60 days. Just click the link at the top of my description or scan the QR code that's on screen now. And because this free trial is much longer than what's usually offered, you can use it in whatever way works for you and whenever feels right for you. Contracts and sponsors are one side of the coin. The other side is the actual money, the hard cash, and what happens to it. Show me the money! If you've been watching my videos for a while, you will already know how I got this injury, what it was, and how it's been one of the less straightforward injuries to deal with. But if you're new here, here's the recap. A few weeks into my Chicago Marathon build, I went on a trail run and tripped really hard, smashed my knee on some rocks, and it swelled up quite badly. And although I was diagnosed with a bone bruise at the time, after 2 weeks, it was pain-free. I was able to train on it completely uninhibited, and I actually got in 6.5 weeks of the best marathon training I've ever done. Then, out of nowhere, it started hurting again. We spent a week and a half trying to figure out what was going on. We suspected it was patellofemoral joint pain, which is an umbrella term for runner's knee and lots of stuff going on in the joint, but it wasn't responding as we expected it to. So I got an MRI. I was originally misdiagnosed from that MRI with a fracture, but what we now know was going on was, yes, there was patellofemoral joint pain there, but not only did I have patella tendinopathy, I had quad tendinopathy, some cartilage damage, and Hoffer's fat pad inflammation. Kind of like a knee injury soup with lots of flavors going on. That was the start of what's been a very long process with this injury, and I think the start of an injury is when it's kind of easy to see the impact. In that immediate moment of finding out, I had to pull out of the race. My agent did that for me, which was really nice to not have to call the organizers myself.
But what I do have are a very particular set of skills.
He made that phone call and said, yep, Phily's injured. She's not going to be racing the Chicago Marathon. She's not going to be taking advantage of the package that I had in agreement from them, which was quite a nice one. I then had to change our flights because obviously we weren't going to travel to Chicago. I had no reason to be there anymore. We had to get home. I needed to cancel our hotel booking. And obviously when you book these things, they're never refundable. You never get the money back when you have to alter them.
Business.
That was kind of easy to accept. That's one of the things you have to factor in, I guess. But having never had an MRI before, or really any serious injury, I didn't realize how expensive it was. The out-of-pocket costs from the injury itself in that concentrated moment probably came to about £3,000 in flights changing, hotels changing, the MRI scan, the physio cost, and that's not even including the money that I missed out on if I hadn't been injured and if I would have been doing the race. Because when you sign up to do these big races, typically you'll get a package which can consist of an appearance fee. There are race bonuses on offer, whether that's position bonuses that are available to everyone, or in my case, a personalized bonus system, which is Phily. You're racing the Chicago Marathon. If you finish in this position or higher, or if you run this time, you will get X from us. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to disclose exactly what those figures are, but let's just say it would have been a huge percentage of my year. And no, I do not have medical insurance.
What?
Unfortunately, I did have medical insurance until approximately 2 weeks before this happened, because I was on some support back home in the UK under England Athletics. works, but that support is reevaluated every year and the athletes that they support changes, and I was unfortunately cut from that program, having never used the medical insurance before, just when I was about to need it. So that is something I'm looking into for the future. And I think that was about it for the immediate impact. But as I have learned, the financial cost of an injury doesn't just hit once when you get that injury. It lingers and it continues. What I'm about to show you is a pie chart that represents what I'm going to call the 3 Phillies. Now, obviously, there's only one of me, but this is an analogy, I guess. And these 3 Phillies represent how I earn money. I am a professional athlete, I am a content creator, and I'm a running coach. And this pie chart represents the percentage of my income that comes from those 3 different Phillies. I've done some working out here. This is detailed, okay? I've not just eyeballed this. And this diversification of income streams, if you like, is fully intentional. Do I wake up some days and want to just be an athlete and not have to create content about it or coach other athletes? Yeah, but I also really enjoy those jobs. Some days the running isn't going very well and I get rewarded through my other jobs. Seeing the running going well for the athletes I coach, that's an incredibly rewarding job. And creating content that can teach other runners how to do things or connect with this community. I love all 3 things I do. I just want to make that clear. But what it does for me in a financial sense is it protects me. So if one of those things is impacted by anything, an injury, a change in the way that content is monetized, a drop in the number of athletes I coach, I'm protected and I'm not in the danger zone trying to figure out how I'm going to pay my bills that month, which I appreciate puts me in a really fortunate position. If I pick up an injury or if I want to take a break from social media, I'm not kind of back at the drawing board. And I'm not saying this is the right model to have as an athlete. It is the right one for me, but it's definitely different from how many athletes have their finances structured, and maybe they're earning more than me and they're able to do that just through sponsorships and contracts, but it does leave them open to a much higher degree of risk if something comes up like an injury or an illness that materially changes how they're able to perform and ultimately the income they get for that. So how did this pie chart change for me during my injury? Pretty unsurprisingly, coaching didn't really take a hit. In fact, I took on a few new athletes actually because I had a little bit of extra time and it was something I was really enjoying channeling more energy into. So the coaching portion of my pie got a little bit bigger. The content side of things was a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, I had to pivot my content and change what we created about, which was difficult. And when I did need to talk about my injury all the time, that felt really heavy. So we took a little bit of a step back and intentionally put out a little bit less content, which obviously reduces your earning potential. And that was something we were willing to accept. We made that decision. On the other hand, something that we didn't expect was we actually lost a few brand deals that we had either lined up or in the negotiation phases where we were meant to be creating content, but I was meant to be running as part of that content. And those brands didn't want to continue working with us if I wasn't going to be running. We suggested ways that we could pivot the content idea and still make it really fun and entertaining to watch without me running in the video and kind of focusing on something else. But I guess understandably so, they wanted the Philly that is the running Philly that they kind of signed up for. That was a shame, and a couple of those opportunities were pretty big paydays. And then obviously my income as a pro athlete was significantly affected. I would have been making most of my money for 2025 at the Chicago Marathon if I'd have raced it and if it had gone well. Those are in 2 kind of separate chunks, if you like. If I'd started the race and finished the race in whatever time, I'd have been going home with a certain amount of money. And if that result had been good, really good, very, very, very good, then I would have been taking home, you know, a decent chunk more income from those results, both from the race and also my main sponsor. But for me moving forwards, although I was at that point in contract negotiations where it can be very important to be performing and to not be injured, it didn't have a huge impact on those negotiations, those conversations, and future contracts because of the other things I bring to the table alongside being an athlete in that I create content, which I'm very grateful for. And aside from my coaching business, which really is just a one-man band, it's me, I run it, I'm the coach, the athletes work with me. Having management there to step in and be involved on the athlete income and the content creation income was invaluable. And them holding my hand as we walked through that, received some no's from brands that wanted to work with me before I got injured, as I lost a lot of motivation for creating content because it wasn't about running. That support is just invaluable. And obviously they take a cut of what we earn, but it's 100% worth the cost. Materially, when you look at my finances or for our finances, because me and Daniel are a team in everything that we do, it wasn't too bad. It was scary at first, and when all of that was unknown, but it was nowhere near as scary as the mental side of injury and the impact that it could have and did have on my brain. The day that I realized I wouldn't make the start line and that I would DNS a marathon for the first time in my career was the moment that the severity of the situation was confirmed, if you like. I can remember sitting at Molly's dining table at my laptop, reading the email with the MRI results on, speaking to my physio Chris on the phone and thinking, I can't believe this is happening. I'd lost what I'd been working towards for the last 3-4 months, and it hurt. I was also really, really scared because I've never been through this before. It was my first serious injury and I didn't know how I'd cope, not just with letting go of the race, but with not running for an unknown period of time. And how I coped, if I'm completely honest, was much worse than I would have predicted at that moment in time. How do I encompass the emotional roller coaster of 4 months of this injury? I feel like the word roller coaster is overused. And also roller coasters are fun. This was not fun, but it was so up and down. And I think the nature of the injury that I had really didn't help with that. Not only do you sometimes feel more hopeful one day than the next, but the goalposts were constantly moving. One minute I was told that I'd be building back to 60 miles a week in 6 weeks' time, then 8 weeks would pass and I still wasn't running. You then get back running and that is a huge milestone, but it's not simple and straightforward, and there's a lot of fine tuning and a lot of pain still to be felt. I think the two biggest things that I struggled with were the loss of identity and the impact of a loss of routine and doing something that I really love, which I guess resulted in a loss of direction as well. I've always been very aware that running is a huge part of my identity, and sometimes I've even lent into it, and I've literally said in therapy sessions, yeah, I know that running is who I am, it is my life, but that's not a problem right now. That is a problem for the future when I have to retire, and we will deal with that when we get there. Unfortunately, it is a problem for now, because when something like this happens, you do lose that part of your life. I'd like to protect myself from that in the future by really working on and valuing and owning the parts of my identity that aren't running, so that I feel a little bit less lost next time. And it's a tricky one because I don't want running to mean less to me or to be less of who I am, because I think that really enables me to do what I do, to have those 3 Phillies all doing jobs relating to running, and obviously the most important one being me doing the running. But I think there's a happy place in the middle where you can lose it overnight, and obviously that's soul destroying, but it doesn't take away the very essence of your being. Because I have learned over these months that I am more than an athlete. There are the parts of me that I don't share with the internet and that are just as much contributing to who I am that are still there when running falls away. The loss of routine and the loss of doing the running every day is what I actually think sent me really spiraling, because for years, unknowingly, I was medicating myself for my undiagnosed ADHD, and then last year, my diagnosed ADHD, because running and the routine that training gave me was huge for regulating my ADHD. Little did I know, because I'd not really taken a long break from it before. So I thought my ADHD was bad, and then I got injured, and we were as emotionally dysregulated, disorganized, inattentive, insert all of the worst things I say about myself linked to my ADHD. That's who I was. And still being relatively recently diagnosed, that was a huge, unexpected, and very challenging part of this injury. I had to learn to try and give myself what running had been giving me every day without being able to really cross-train, and whilst dealing with something that was hugely emotionally taxing. Pairing that with the uncertainty and the timelines constantly shifting, not knowing whether I was coming or going, feeling disconnected from my sport and my peers in my sport, unable to create content about what I normally create about, losing some work opportunities, and then the very well-meaning, but a lot of the time unhelpful, constant reminders. How's the injury when you see someone that you haven't seen in weeks? How's your knee doing today from loved ones? Are you still injured? When are you racing next? There were some really low days where it was so all-consuming, and I felt helpless because I didn't see a way out or see an end to it, that were without a doubt the lowest low days I have ever experienced. And I think it will stay that way for a very long time. I hope it does anyway. If I can offer any advice to anyone who is injured, whether you're a professional athlete or not, it impacts you a lot. Try as hard as you can to not think too far ahead or too far back. As painful as it can be to sit in the present moment and with the reality that you're presented with, thoughts about the future and when you'll race again and when this might be better or not really just cause more anxiety. And looking back and comparing to where you once were and how long that road feels to get there just makes you depressed. You don't need to feel guilty about how you feel because your feelings are valid. I definitely felt guilty for not creating more content and not sharing more about this injury with the world, but guilt around that or anything else just doesn't serve a purpose. And coming back to how I coped worse than I would have predicted, I think being really frank and honest with yourself right at the start that this is gonna fucking suck. This is gonna be really hard. Running is so important to me and it is so integrated in my life. I think I was very naive to think that this would be anything other than incredibly challenging, despite it being my first injury and I was gonna roll my sleeves up and get on with it. And you can't be prepared for it, but I think being prepared for the worst can actually protect you when you hit those darkest days. The good news is that recovery is in a really good place right now. I finally feel like I am making progress. I'm moving forwards, not just in fitness, but in moving away from this injury. And I'm thinking about it less and less every day and every week. So if you want the behind the scenes of this comeback all the way to my next marathon, with some shorter races and some fun life events peppered before that, stick around because I'm documenting it all. And as always, love the grind.